And now we are live. Yeah, right. Hey everyone, good evening. Thank you for coming in today and taking out the time for being a part of this hangout session with us. And quickly to introduce myself, I've met most of you during our various interactions, but for those I hadn't had a chance to actually meet and interact, my name is Pearl, and I'm here with the upGrad admissions team. And we are looking after all the direct communication that goes out to you guys, and I will be your moderator for the evening today. So I hope you have a good session with us. And before we start, let me just quickly run you through what the agenda for the evening is over here today. And we have Rachel Steinberg with us, and Rachel is the product manager at housing.com. She has been with them for over a year now. And in her role as product manager, she has driven most of housing's mobile products. And she has also co-founded two ventures. One is called Explain and the other is called YapZap. And she also holds an MBA from the Harvard Business School. I'm sure maybe Rachel can share some insights on her two ventures maybe sometime later during the evening. And today, Rachel will be mainly talking about how the product management process at housing.com goes through, and also she will share some important aspects of the product development process. So she will be talking for about 20 minutes of time, and during this time you should make use of the live chat option, which you could see right next to the live video which is on right now. And you can post in your questions, anything that you would like to direct towards Rachel. And towards the next 30 minutes after Rachel has shared her insights with us, we will be posing those questions to her. And we will definitely try and cover all the questions that you guys post, but maybe due to paucity of time, we may not be able to cover all. So I'd really appreciate your understanding on that. And so yeah, let's start. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Rachel. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And I'm just going to hand over the session to you now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for joining. I'm excited to talk to you about product management, mostly because I really like doing it and it's a lot of fun, and I hope that you guys also have fun doing it. But I wanted to give you a quick overview of some of the things that I wish I had known before before I started product management, and also just some of the key words to know, or generally buzzwords, things that you should have at the top of your mind. So it's both going to be an overview, a general overview, but also some quick tips about things you should do, things you should be thinking, and hopefully that will encourage you to also look at other products with more, I guess, with more of a product management hat on, so you can constantly be learning. Because actually a lot of the learning that I have is getting to see other products that are trying new things. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen to share the presentation with you. All right, so let us know if you can't see the presentation well. So it's going to mostly have some, everyone should have a white screen right now, but it'll come back in a minute. Okay, so product management is really great, and it's actually great for many reasons. I think that one reason is it takes a lot of interdisciplinary skills to be able to be a good product manager. So you're always being challenged in in a creative way, in a process-oriented way, in a structured way, and an unstructured way. So you learn a lot both about yourself and about products and about other people. So the number one thing to remember with product management is to always communicate. You're constantly communicating on many fronts. So you're communicating firstly with your team and your teammates. And what that means as a product manager is you're communicating with the developers, with the designers, with the marketing arm, with the business arm, with other product managers, with the QA team. And sometimes in smaller startups, you're also on all those teams yourself. So you'll have to do your own QA. You might have to here and there fix some bugs yourself. You'll have to do the marketing for the launch. You'll have to take care of the SEO. So remember that as a product manager, you're always going to be doing many roles, which is one thing that I think is great about being a product manager is you learn a lot of things across many disciplines. So always communicate with your teammates. And also communication doesn't mean having a lot of meetings. In fact, it generally means the opposite of that. So you usually want to communicate informally, formally, through emails, through writing down user stories, which we'll get to later, and any different mode. A lot of teams have their own way of communicating, and you'll have to conform to those ways of communicating. So one thing you'll hear a lot is agile development, which is basically saying that things happen in small, discrete, and fast cycles. So you'll take one idea that you have. Let's say you want to use you want to get more feedback from users by rating the app. So you'll say, okay, we need a rate the app feature. You'll look at other products and see how they do it. You'll think about what helps, why you really need it, what problem are you solving for the users, and you'll quickly come up with some stories of how the user is going to interact with this rate the app screen, and then you communicate it with your team, you launch it, and you have data and tracking so that you can see how it's working with the user, and then you can get feedback from that data. So what starts to happen is first you have an idea. So I'm using my mouse as a pointer. So first you have an idea, you try to understand your users and understand what they're going through. So you mainly always need to understand what your users are doing. Then you're going to write up user stories. So in most cases, and this is mostly specific to agile development, what you do is you write things from the perspective of the user. So you say, as a user, I want to be able to give feedback on the app because when I'm frustrated, I want the app to be able to improve to my standards. Or when I'm happy, I want to let them know, I want to give the team that's working on the app feedback so that it can get better. So you generally write it from the perspective of the user. There's a lot of good information on user stories online. So basically, I just want to throw some terms out there that you can Google and look up for more information. Although I think a lot of you probably have an idea of these things. Then you have to kind of think about what you're going to do first, what goes in the first wave, because you're not going to ever build an entire suite of features in one go. You usually want to do some small launchable parts and then increment on it. Then you want to get it out. You want to track the data. You want to improve it. And then you go back to thinking what problem you have to solve, what ideas do you have for it, the user studies, and you're constantly going around and around in this cycle. So basically your weeks are just going to look like these long pink circles of this cycle. So what are other ways you can communicate with your team? So some ways that people communicate is having these big information radiators, which track the health of the product or what's going on in the product, who's launching code. So having these information radiators is a really great way actually to keep everyone on the same page, especially across teams. So these are actually the information radiators at a company called Etsy, which is basically very customized, an artisan marketplace e-commerce site, which actually has a lot of good design and a lot of intuitive interactions on their products. Another way you can communicate is by having this Post-it board, which a lot of people use in agile development to show each Post-it represents one feature. So it usually shows you what stage the features are at. Are they in the backlog? Are they in development? Are they in QA? Are they launched? So a lot of people communicate with these physical boards. Then the other thing you want to do is communicate well with users. So what does that mean? You actually see this a lot in products, although you might not notice all of it, but now I think you'll start to notice it. And it's always good to take screenshots so that you can see what so that you can remember good and bad communication. So I have thousands of screenshots on my phone and on my computer just of small things I've seen in the product. So one thing you want to do when you're asking for, so just to give you some context here, I'm going to just give you a quick breeze of some good ways to communicate with users. One thing that you want to do is always communicate why you need something, how it's going to help the user. So for example, when you log in on Chrome, it tells you why you need to log in. When you're going to give, when Facebook's asking for more data, you can always explain why you need that data. Facebook usually is good at explaining why it needs that data. So you can see all of these examples here. I think that actually the last two are not as good, but they still prove some point. So one is, you also generally want to have friendly text and have a friendly way of communicating with users. So sometimes if things are obvious why you need them or why they're helpful, you can, just kind of make it witty or funny, because that's one good way of communicating. Other apps give you more of like a transparent layer so that it looks like there's something behind the login screen or whatever screen you're on, so that you're communicating to the user, we just need this one bit of information to take you to a more thorough place. The last one also is not a great example, but it does, on a very basic level explain, I did an action, and then it says, okay, you have to sign in to be able to do that action. It's not great, but at least it's better than some of the other products I've seen. Another good way of communicating with users is to give warnings to them. So when Instagram started launching ads, it had this big image with an explanation of why ads are being launched on Instagram and what the sponsored link means. So when products in general are a relationship with a user, so you always want to make sure that you're giving users a heads up that you're maintaining the relationship that you want to have. Sometimes the relationship is that of more of an educator or some expert to someone who knows less. Those are usually more business related products. Sometimes it's a friend to a friend. So you want to think of the tone with which you want to communicate, and then communicate to users that way. Another good thing that I've seen is always give feedback to the user if something happens. So if you post something on Instagram, it will say sending or uploading or upload failed in this top bar, but it doesn't affect your browsing experience. So usually updating by giving a success screen or indicating that there was some failure without fully disrupting the flow is a really good way of maintaining that communication. A lot of times people don't exactly know what to do in certain situations. So one good thing that's helpful to give them, the screen's just lost, but it will come back in a second. So one thing that's helpful to give them is a suggestion of what you might want to do. And I think Facebook does this really well. Instagram does this okay, but Facebook is really good at this. So here's a few examples. One is I copied a link in another app, and then it puts it here as an example of something that I should post. Or it will see who a lot of my friends are, and if we all share the same job and the speed with which I friended people or people friended me from one company increased, it asked me to update my profile. So they're really good at making suggestions, so that instead of you having to give the information, it's just giving you a yes or no or one click answer to help build whatever information is valuable to the network or to the product. So here, when you press the send, it gives you some quick send options in Instagram, but then you can also search for your own contacts. So it's always good to suggest what the most common actions are within a user flow. And a good thing to do is to always ask for feedback. So sometimes it could be very basic. So WhatsApp, after you do a call, will ask you to rate the call sometimes, not all the time, because that would be disruptive. the New York Times quickly asks if you're enjoying this app, but mostly they ask because they want you to rate it. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Here's an ad that Google had, and then when I clicked X, it asked me why I'm clicking X. So always remember that asking for feedback is a good option, because sometimes you're going to be stuck in kind of an assumption, let's say like an assumption rabbit hole where you don't really know what users are thinking, and you can always use a feedback widget as an option. Okay, so some people said that they can't read the text clearly. In general, the text is, I'm basically going through what all the text says, and then I'll share the screenshot slides with everyone so that everyone can get to read these screenshots. I just wanted to mostly give an overview of these screens, so that's why I'm going through them quickly, and all the screens I'll send around afterwards. So another good thing to keep in mind, a lot of times if there's no information, so let's say someone searches for something and there's no results, or someone clicks a part of the app and there's no content in that part yet because the user hasn't done any actions. Always use that opportunity to educate the user about what they should be doing in that section. So for example, once I clicked on Google's inbox, and then instead of it saying you don't have access to this, it says, basically you don't have access to it, but get an invite here, learn more. So you should never take your users down a dead end. So when I go to Messenger and Facebook, it will explain, who has Messenger and give an install option. So you should really never have a screen that doesn't have a next step or another option on it, or a way of educating the user about the next step. So here's Google Hangouts. If I click on favorites and I don't have favorites, then it explains to me how I can favorite. So always use emptiness as an opportunity to communicate with the user. And lastly, here's some things that are poor communication. So I'll just give, I think we can all generally identify poor communication areas, but usually it's like it's a very unfriendly page with nothing to do, or a poorly sized page. So here's if I unsubscribe from something, the success state is very small. So that's not helpful, and it doesn't encourage you to do anything else. If there's nothing in, for example, in my purchase section, it should say, instead of saying family has no purchases, it can give information on how do you purchase something, what are the top purchases. So always, don't forget to use empty states to communicate instead of to just frustrate users. So that was a very quick overview of communication, and I'll share all the slides with the screenshots on them so you can have a look. But the main point is to keep an eye on the fact that good products are always communicating with you and users in general. So always remember to communicate with people. All right, so now we have our first pop star example. So for communication, you can always think of Taylor Swift. So she's actually very good at communicating with users. If you look at her Twitter or Instagram or any mode of social media, she's constantly communicating with her fans, or even not her fans. But when you're thinking of user communication, I think Taylor Swift's a good person to keep in mind. So next lesson, you're always the voice of the user. So the main job of the PM is to be the voice of the user. So this section will be very quick, but what you need to do is always make sure that you are having calls with people that are using your products. You're kind of observing people use your products, or even other products. So you really want to get an understanding of the demographics, of even the anthropology of the people that are using your product, so that you can really be the voice for them, because there's no one else on the floor that's supposed to protect the interests and really be the connection to the user. So that as a PM, I would say that's your main job. And that's why communication is so important between you and the team and you and the users. So when you're thinking about your users, generally you divide them up into user segments. A lot of the apps right now are looking at, and when I say apps, it's also websites, but in general, I like to think of apps first because they force you to prioritize since they have such small screens. So a lot of the apps right now are trying to balance between a discovery and a search flow because those are two main user flows. So you never want to isolate any of your users in general. So you always want to account for the major groups. So there'll be a big discovery component probably and a big search component depending on the app. Or some apps you can see, although I think this is getting slightly less popular, so this was one of our first housing onboarding screens. So they just kind of segment the user by having the user segment themselves. They're kind of saying, here's what we have, what segment do you fall in? It's usually best to give them some discovery so they can figure out so you actually can figure out what segment they fall in instead of them having to explicitly tell you. So generally account for all these major user flows, and we're kind of in this place where if you think especially about e-commerce, this is what people are used to when they go into stores, right? You can see a lot of things very quickly, but on digital products, you can't have an entire, big span of the products that you're selling to show. So this is kind of the fun part of being a product manager, is seeing how you can translate the feelings of seeing a lot of the options of products in a much smaller screen and in a much smaller, just generally in a more condensed flow. So it involves a lot of creativity and innovation. And also it's very challenging. Okay, so the people that we have to emulate from pop culture for this segment are Jimmy Fallon, who's actually he's great at understanding people to the point that he does really great impressions. So to be able to do a good impression, you have to understand people and kind of predict what they're going to say and how they're going to say it and their mannerisms. So when you're thinking of being a PM and understanding your users, try to think like Jimmy Fallon. And then the other person, so we have two pop stars for this for this lesson, is Adele, because Adele is very good at understanding user segments and then putting all of those segments into her songs. So a lot of her songs mix different types of music. So you can have some, slight jazz, some R&B, some pop, and put them in the same song so that she's actually accounting for many user segments within one flow. Next lesson. All right, so this is one of my favorite parts. I guess I've said that a lot about about different PM parts, but I think that this is probably one of the most challenging ones, which is really understanding that there's a lot of emotion when people use products, and you have to understand what type of emotion you want to have with your relationship with the user. So sometimes you want to build an emotion of urgency. So I think, and a good example of that is booking.com for hotels. Anytime I go on that website, I just get anxiety because they're building this product of urgency because they make you feel like everything is going to sell out if you don't book now. So they're always trying to get you to book. So that's one of the core emotions that they have on their site. And I think that they do a really good job of that. Then, other products want to build a more relaxed emotion or a more friendly emotion, or this is the app that you use when you want to just chill, or this is the app that you use when you want to get something done efficiently. So really understand what emotion users have at each step and what emotion you want them to have at each step. So the main thing here is to remember that pixels are powerful. So if you use certain colors or you put things in different places, or you know, and I think booking.com does this well. So it makes, if there's 2 rooms left, it will write 2 rooms left in red. So it draws your attention to some sort of urgency and some sort of, you know, almost emergency state. So remember that every pixel on your screen is powerful, and it's also powerful at getting people to feel a certain way. And you do have a lot of power because you can manipulate emotions, which you have to be really careful about, but you can use it to make an impact and really help users. Okay, so for this we have Wes Anderson. He made a lot of movies that are he's known to be very obsessive about his films. So The Grand Budapest Hotel or The Royal Tenenbaums, Darjeeling Limited, I think Incredible Mr. Fox. So all of his films have lots of obsession to detail and very specific types of environments. Even Moonrise Kingdom is a good example of one of his films that has this. So he basically makes every single part of the screen useful and manipulates the environment to convey certain emotions within each scene. So he's a really good person to think about, and also to think about how important attention to detail is. The last lesson is to just say no. Most of your job as a product manager is just going to be to say no to features and figure out how to prioritize. So there's a lot of different ways that you can prioritize. The main thing is to create a framework for doing this and to stick to it. So sometimes people have a matrix where it's one side is how often people use the product and one side is how many people use it. And if you're in the top right corner, it means a lot of people are using it and they're using it very often. So that's an important flow to focus on. Sometimes it might just be there's 3 problems that our company wants to solve. Here are and every feature has to solve one of those problems, and they're ranked based on the potential outcomes. So there's many frameworks for prioritizing, but the lesson here is to think about how you're going to prioritize features, because that's a huge part of the job, and it's also one of the harder parts within the company, because there'll be a lot of ideas floating. A lot of people are going to be asking you to make this feature or that feature, and you just have to say no to a lot of things, because it's hard for you to build a lot of features. How should I say it? Like, it's hard to build a lot of good features. You kind of can build only one really good feature at a time. And you want to make sure that you build the right feature for the users and you're actually solving a problem. So you'll always have to balance short-term wins and long-term gains, but in general, saying no is important. So for this, we have Shonda Rhimes, who was the writer and producer on a lot of famous television shows. And she wrote this book recently about saying yes, but the reason why she said she can say yes is because she had a long time of saying no to things. So think about her for inspiration on saying no. And I just want to take it back to the last important thing, which was the first important thing, which is to always communicate. You can never communicate too much across the organization and to users, because people will interpret things differently. And especially when you're communicating across so many teams that almost have their own language within the team. So communicating internally and externally is really important. So I hope that gave you a lot of a very quick overview of the basics of product management, and hopefully why I really like product management. But I'm excited to hear your questions, and I hope that I can give you even more insights. Hey, I actually I couldn't hear the question. Do you mind just saying it one more time?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, sure. Sorry. I think my mic was on mute. So I'm going to start off again, saying that I'm sure our students really had a great time listening to your presentation. They have a lot to learn as well. And the first question to you is from Priyanka, who's from Design Genie. So her question is, what's the best way to get user feedback before you build a robust database that is close to when you have just launched? Are focus groups the way to go, or is there a better way?
Okay, so okay, that's a good question. So user feedback you can kind of get in a lot of different ways, and there's some kind of cheap and dirty ways, and there's some more expensive ways, and more perhaps accurate and harder to get ways. So one of the ways of doing it is just asking people in your organization that are less tech savvy. So asking people in other teams, not, let's say, not in product tech or design teams, and just see how they're responding to new features or to a new flow. That's one good and easy way because people are around you. Another way is, depending on the product, you could even just go stand on the street corner and show people the new feature and just understand how they interact with it and how they feel while they're using it. So those are, I would say, the easier ways. Even showing some of your friends or asking your friends to show some of their friends or even their parents might be a good way of getting quick feedback. I think user groups are helpful when you're coming up with bigger features and you really need to understand what is the offline and online user flow, or generally what are people doing, and how does this product fit within their lives, or what problem is this solving for people, and what are the alternatives. So I think when you need more information, it's really good to get user groups or do focus groups, but they're generally more time consuming and sometimes harder to get people to do them. But doing those studies once in a while ends up being really helpful and fruitful if you ask the right questions and you create the right environment for them. And one more way I'll say is, sometimes you're not going to really have the answer before you launch. So you can always launch and then make sure that the data is tagged properly so you can track the usage based on how people are interacting with it. So if you say, I want to solve this problem, here's 3 ways of doing it. I'm going to choose way number 1, and it happens to be this button or this flow or this screen. Make sure the important parts of that screen are tagged so that you can actually see if people are using it to solve the problem that you were originally trying to solve.
Right. Thanks, Rachel. So the next question to you is now from Abhay. So he has a question. He says, how would you build a prototype that shows potential customers how the app would actually look like?
Okay, so there's actually some tools you can use online for building prototypes. Some people use different tools. I think if you just Google prototype builder, the best way of building a prototype, that might be one way of doing it. If you want to do, I'll again give you the range of the easiest way to the hardest ways. So if you're doing it just as a product manager, sometimes I even build wireframes in Google Docs. Actually, I'll use the presentation Google app and just make a presentation of the screens, and then you can kind of print them out and cut them out into, either web screens or phone screens, and just show people pieces of paper. So that would be like one really easy way. Then there's some prototype builders that you can use. I think UXPin is one of them. There's a few others that I've used in the past as well. Those are slightly more complicated. And then the last way is actually if you do some, I guess, front end development without doing any back end, to just get people to be able to click on things. But that in between state of using a tool that lets you build a prototype even Marvel is a good one, are probably the easiest ways to get the most accurate feedback, because sometimes the paper way, there's obviously hurdles with that because it's harder to imagine what it would be like as a product. So I think that that's using those tools is probably the easiest way.
Got that. So now we have another question from Surajit. He asks, in the development of an app, is it good to have more drill down options or putting everything in less number of screens?
So definitely less number of screens is better. In general, fewer things are better because you want to make sure that you're really solving the one problem and the main flow for everything. So if you're hiding something between, if something is more than 2 or 3 at most taps away from the user on an app, I think that you should question how important it is and how well you're using the screen. Because if something is pretty far down in an app, it might not, either it's not that important, or you're not using your, I guess, your screen and your tabs and your buttons effectively. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Well, I guess we'll take more detailed questions from them later, and we can give them a more detailed insight to that. So moving on to the next question we have is from Anup. He asks how to find what features customers like or dislike, as most of the time a user doesn't spend time writing a feedback back to us. So how would you unearth this blind spot?
So in general, it's going to be through data. Like the best way of seeing what people are doing is through data, but there's going to always be challenges with just data. So that's actually where focus groups are helpful to mix them. So what you can see from data is how many people are using certain features, but what you can't see from data is why people are not using certain features. So it could be because the design seems like the button isn't clickable. That it could be a design or a UI thing, or maybe it's a buried feature, or it could be just because it's actually not helpful, or people don't understand it, or maybe the text on the button doesn't convey what it actually does. So there obviously are a lot of reasons why people might not be using something. So what the data can show you is, are people using it? If people are not using it, then that's where you might want to start getting some focus groups, or even asking targeted questions within the app, or the site. So what that means is, if you see a lot of people are not using something, so for example, if it search results, if you see people are consistently not clicking on any search results for a certain result set, you can always put at the end of the results a question saying, haven't found anything you love, tell us why. So you can ask more targeted questions as well, which gets you slightly more feedback, because if users just see general feedback, it's hard to respond to it. So I think in the screens that I'll share with you, or the parts of the screenshots that I was showing you, I think a good example is when I clicked on the X on the ad for a Google app, then it asked me, why do you not want to see this ad? So it's a very targeted feedback that's one tap away or one click away.
Right. So our next question is from Ayush now. As a mobile app product, when you design a website to capture more users, should you stick to the same features as the original mobile app, or is it all right to include more features into the website?
Okay, so this will depend on the product. Generally, most products have more things on the web than on the app, but a lot of it has to do with what product it is. So if there's things that users are never going to do, or at least they're not going to do now on an app, it's okay to have them on the web. In general, it's you want to play up the parts of the app that are helpful to you and the user, and play up the parts of the web that are helpful to you and the user. So if there's something that requires a really big visual, or some really in-depth, bigger presentation, you can usually give a small bit of it on the app and then tell the users you can see more on the web. But you usually want to keep things self-contained within the product, so you don't generally want to like force them to go to another platform. So you want it to be self-contained, but you might put additional things that play to each strength. So another example is it's a lot easier to have GPS or microphone related input from the user on an app than on the web. So you can usually play up those types of features. And usually people are using apps when they're on the go or when they're not by a desktop anyway. So you want to think about what are the more important user flows for being on the go. And you always include those in the app. So you don't want to frustrate the user, but it is okay to have some slight differences, I think. Again, it's going to depend on where your user base is generally going and what types of experiences they have on each platform. The other thing that you can do is generally put almost everything you need on the app, but have some parts of the app that are web frames so you can load it dynamically. And if they're not used as much, it's okay to pull them from the website, and users acknowledge that they can probably get a better experience of that screen on the website, but at least they can see it or preview it on the app as well.
Right. So our next question we have now is from Anirudh. He asks, in product development, is it more efficient to explore and add features incrementally, or to have a vision of all possible features and plan the addition of features?
Definitely go incrementally, because sometimes you'll make assumptions over time, and as you add something into the product, you might find out that the assumption that you made is incorrect. So that means all of the other features that were based on that assumption are also incorrect. So you always want to increment over time. You might have a vision of what the mission of the product is or the goal of the product is, but it's best I would say, to increment slowly over time rather than having one big vision at the beginning and then building an entire roadmap for months ahead, because things change all the time. The way you understand your users changes over time, and the more you set a rigid roadmap in place, the harder it is to develop. So on the presentation, I mentioned agile development, which is more what especially consumer, but also business teams are starting to use for product development. But there's another type of product development, which is called waterfall development. So if you think of a waterfall, one thing happens, then the other, then the other, then the other, and then the water's going down. And so that's another way of developing products, which is actually doing more of thinking about everything at once, then writing all the specs, then telling the design team, then the design team shows the developers. So everyone is kind of siloed, and it's more of an assembly line of product development, and it's harder to iterate on things and to change things. So you can read a bit about the differences between agile and waterfall, but in general, I think it's better to increment slowly, because you get to learn from each feature that you put in, and you get to learn more about your users with each feature.
Right. So our next question is from Himanshu. It's on the similar lines which Anup had asked with regards to getting feedback from your users. So I'll just run it again past you in case you want to add some more points to that.
Okay.
His question is, how would you increase the probability of getting feedback from users? This is a very important activity, but every user does not prefer to do so. So what would be your
Okay.
thoughts on that?
So getting feedback from users, it is challenging, but it's also kind of fun, because you can try to think of new and creative ways of getting feedback from people. So one way of getting feedback is not even showing that you're getting feedback from the user. So that's the data route, which is make sure that certain parts of your app the buttons or parts of your website are tagged so that you can see how people are using them, how far down they're scrolling, and you can infer some feedback from data. But then the other way is being clever about how you ask questions, when you ask questions. So if a user is right at the beginning of using a product, like, you probably don't want any feedback from them, and it would also disrupt their flow and what they want to accomplish. Once you see that there's been certain types of successful interactions, then you can start asking for some things from the user. So always think about feedback as something that the user is doing for you as a favor. So you don't want to ask for that favor too early on in the process. So some things you can do is if you have a product that the user is searching for something and there's results, you can put very targeted feedback questions in those results. So if you see that they've shortlisted a lot of things, but they're not going to their shortlist, you can ask, you also want to be kind of witty and thoughtful. So maybe in that case, you can say, hey, it could look like a shortlist illustration. And it could say, hey, I really miss you. Why aren't you coming to hang out with me, or something like that? And then you can say, why aren't you using the shortlist, and give a couple options, or figure out the right way of phrasing a text box. So you always want to have the more targeted and almost the more funny or I almost want to say witty the interaction is, I think the more receptive people are going to be to giving feedback. And it should just be easy and short. So even Uber is a good example of this. So if you give your driver a bad rating, they give you very easy one-tap responses to get some feedback, and they also have a text box. So you can always think of how you exchange in any interaction you have on the product. It's always going to be an exchange of favors almost. So if you want the user to log in, you have to explain to them why it benefits them. If you need feedback from them, you need to kind of incorporate it in the flow. So for Uber, they almost force you to do it so that you can get another ride. So that's one route of kind of forcing people before they do their next interaction. But I think in most consumer products where it's not the 100% same flow all the time, you can intersperse it in a feed or somewhere within the product. Another good product that does this is Facebook, actually. Facebook has a lot of hints within their feed to get information or responses from users. So they always have a good, when you hide something, they ask why you're hiding it. When you're not interacting much with your feed, they kind of give you a way of optimizing your feed, and they usually put some things within the feed. So you can kind of, especially on the app, so you can always look out for what other people are doing for ideas about how to get feedback.
Right. So we have another question from Karthik now, and he asks, could you define the user persona for the housing app?
Okay, so it's a good question, because there's never really going to be one user persona for any product. Usually you have groups of users, and some companies even go as far as giving the user groups a name, and almost I've been in sessions where some companies will give everyone a magazine and say, okay, this is one user segment. What products would they like from this magazine? And paste them on the wall so that people can really think about that user segment as one individual person that represents the segment, and understand what they like and what they don't like, and how they interact with the world, and what their preferences are. So they really build out a full character. I think we could do that better at housing, but you can say one user segment on housing is a new dad or a new family member, a new mom or a new dad that hasn't bought a home before, but they're looking for their first home with their young child. And so that is a user segment that means to me, okay, it's someone who needs to be educated about the buying process. It's someone who will have strict criteria about what they need because they can't compromise for certain parts. Like if you have a child, you need to live near a school. So there'll be things that that user can't compromise on. But it'll also be more of a discovery flow and education flow initially, and then it will get into a more serious criteria and search and narrowing down flow. And then the user again will need more education related to financing. Another user persona is the slightly more seasoned investor who's buying a second or third home even to as an investment that will likely rent that out. So in that case, you want to identify that user from early on. If they seem like they are diving into the search, they're only looking at investment types of properties, and they understand, they're flexible on filters, but they understand how to use filters, then, and they're not clicking on any of the finance tips, then you can kind of put them in that segment. And you then give them targeted information and targeted results based on that assumption. So those are two personas within the housing product.
Right. So our next question is now from Sonam, and she asked that how do you avoid your product design being copied by others?
So you actually can't avoid product design being copied by others, and the best designers will always look at other products for inspiration. But what you can't really copy is the company culture, which I think impacts the way things are designed and the way things are executed. So there'll always be copying, but there's always things that are going to be harder to copy, which is, for example, if a lot of people now have, a lot of websites now have the same scroll down. There's a big picture with a search bar, a big picture with, some text about the value of the product. Then you scroll down to more of a white or solid color area with some smaller photos and other text. And, there's kind of these templates that are more and more popular and easy to copy. But the thing that's hard to copy is the overall experience, making sure that there's consistent, design is basically a way of communicating with the user. So you want to build that consistent communication and relationship with the user across your product. And it's harder to copy across the product, especially when you have a definite and defined tone. So if you're thinking about your relationship with your users, what you really want to think about is the design being one mode of communication, but the tone of the product being another. So one place that's good to differentiate are on empty states, because those are slightly harder to copy. Meaning if there's no results or nothing on that page, what do you tell the user next? What tone do you have on that page? So once you start building all the screens and all the UI, the whole UI package and the relationship that builds with the user, I think becomes harder to copy, because it's easy to copy one homepage, but it's not less easy to copy the interaction that you have with the user at every user stage of of them using the product. And then the other part is just constantly innovating without changing too much for the user, because users do get comfortable with certain things. So for example, a lot of companies will have the chat in the same place and the filters in the same place. And in general, you want to stick to some conventions because it decreases the learning curve for users.
So our next question now is from Priyanka. Is there a number of possible outcomes or assumptions that one needs to make for each situation when launching a product?
Yeah, so I think I'm not totally sure that I fully understand the question, but from what I think you said is how many basically, all right, so let me talk about assumptions within product development. Yeah.
Would you want me to repeat the question for you?
Yeah, you can repeat it one more time. I'm just not exactly sure which type of assumptions. There's a lot of points where they have assumptions. So do you want to just read it one more time, and then I'll
I'll try. Sure. So the question is, are there a number of possible outcomes assumptions that one needs to make for each situation when launching a product?
Yeah, so um, I'll kind of answer what I think the question is. So in general, when you launch a product, the first thing that you want to think about is what problem am I solving for the user? Am I trying to get users um, to learn more about the buying process, or am I trying to get them to add filters so that they can narrow it down faster? Am I trying to get them to get results faster? Am I trying to give them the feeling that they're understanding that they've seen everything? So one problem there could be, as a user, I don't feel confident in selecting a home because I don't feel like I've seen everything. So you have that problem of, I mean, I guess the standard problem that's across a lot of things, like fear of missing out of an opportunity. So if that's a problem that you see on based on user research, or you've seen people just clicking around a lot, that's one problem. And even that problem is an assumption of why users are doing certain things. So number one, you're kind of assuming the problem, although you should have some good sense of the problem based on user research. But then there's a lot of ways to solve for that problem. So you can come up with a whole list of ideas of ways to solve for it, and then you're going to kind of make an assumption, perhaps again based on some user research, but you can't ever do enough user research to know for sure that the brainstorming that you did leads to, let's say it leads to 10 features. You're going to have to choose one of those features. So you're kind of going to make an assumption again about which feature is going to solve the problem most effectively. And then when you launch it and you see people are not using it, or they are using it, you're going to again have to assume, why are they using it? Why are they not using it? And those are another set of assumptions. So there are a lot of assumptions at every stage, almost the stage of what problem to solve, the stage of what features solve that problem, and the stage of why people are using or not using it. So you do end up with a lot of assumptions throughout the process, and all of the outcomes on the product after you launch it are again going to lead you down like more assumptions in many ways, because you're going to be faced with trying to make assumptions about why people are doing things.
Right. So our next question we have is from Paninder. He asks, usually product managers are employed after the first round of funding. So what is the way out for startups without product managers?
So generally, if startups don't have product managers, it's because they're either smaller or other people are doing the role of a product manager. So, but it gets hard to scale that way because there ends up being more communication needed, a better and better understanding of the user if you're trying to expand the product or scale the product. And so usually companies start adding a product manager when the co-founder or the CEO or the person that was doing, the three people that kind of made up one product manager are getting more busy because they have to spend more time doing what they're actually better at doing, or what they actually need to be doing. So I guess the way out for a startup without a product manager is you either have some really good system in place for developing the products and a really good understanding of the user, or someone else is just splitting their time and doing some of the aspects of product management already.
All right. So we're just be closing up to 9 p.m. now. So we have time for just another couple of more questions. So one question that I'd like to address is from Salil. He asks that for a product startup, which are the factors that affect the total cost and design of the product, and how could one curtail the cost?
Okay, can you say that one more time? For product startup, what are the...
All right, so the question from Salil is that for a product startup, which are the factors that affect the total cost and design of the product, and how can one curtail this cost?
Okay, so there's a lot of costs that go into it. So I think one thing that you'll find starts to add up are using a lot of tools. Like it could be a product management tool like Pivotal or Mingle or other tools. It could be like I was talking about UX Pin before, some of the UX design tools, having licenses for all these features, even using out of the box solutions will add up, and even the server cost ends up adding up. So I think that those are all costs that affect product overall. Some of them are more tech, some of them are more productivity tools, and some of them are out of the box features that decrease development time. So some things you need to consider is, can I just use a free product that will let me do this somewhat as efficiently? And when do I really need to sign on for a proper tool? So for example, a lot of people can use Trello to get them through a lot of the early stages, which has free options. And then they can upgrade to the business planner to a more professional product management tool as well later on. So I think a lot of the cost ends up coming from a lot of these licenses. Then another question you'll have to ask yourself is, should I build it or should I buy it? So what that means is the developer, is it faster if the developer builds this in-house, or if I just use this out of the box tool, and how long will I need to use the out of the box tool for? So there's a lot of companies that solve the feedback problem for you, in that they build a widget that lets you kind of control feedback. So you can, if you want to do something, if time is more valuable to you than building it in-house, then sometimes it's good to just take on these tools. But you can kind of scale the costs as your company scales and as the funding scales, because you're able to get to start and do a lot of things on free software and almost using just spreadsheets and other interactive like free Google tools and apps. And then over time, you'll figure out where are the points that are decreasing productivity that justify having an expense.
All right, so I think that brings us to the end of the session today. Apologies for many of you whose questions we were not able to answer live, but we will definitely put these questions forth to Rachel and get you your answers, and maybe get back to you through an email, and even when we share the PowerPoint presentation with all of you. And I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank Rachel for having taken out the time from her schedule and being with us today this evening. I'm sure all of our participants have really benefited from the insights that you've shared with us, and they're really all gung ho to go out and start implementing the insights that you've shared. So thank you so much for coming in, and maybe if you just want to give like a closing note to our students before we sign off, that'll be great. Thanks.
Thank you guys. I'm always excited to talk about product and product management, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. But you can also send me a message through LinkedIn as well. And in general, I think get inspiration from the products that you're using every day. Start taking screenshots so you remember the good things and the bad things and the frustrating things. And just remember to constantly communicate and just have that good like people and human intuition, because I think that is what helps to make a difference both internally within your team and externally for your product. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys. Good night. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.